So today we're going to be installing this big honkin' roll of insulation in the back of our camper van. I haven't really covered this topic in like 5 years, and there's a very good reason for that. There's one solution that is better than the rest, and that is 3M Thinsulate. I will put a link to where I recommend you buy this insulation from. If you have a Sprinter or a Transit or a ProMaster, you can actually buy a full pre-cut kit, which saves you a ridiculous amount of time. So I'll put links to those pre-cut kits as well as just rolls of the insulation like this one here in the video description below. There's tons and tons of content on this, so I don't want to spend too much time rambling here. But the main reasons I think 3M Thinsulate's the best overall is because it's hydrophobic, so it like doesn't absorb water, and there's going to be water running down the sides of your camper van walls, mostly just due to the condensation that you create when you're in there breathing. Even with contact with water, this stuff is not going to mold over the years, unlike some solutions that I've heard of. Really important when you're insulating a van to get it pushed into all of the cracks and corners, which is pretty easy to do when you have flexible insulation like this stuff. And lastly, thankfully, I haven't actually had to deal with this one firsthand, but it's somewhat fireproof. Like the stuff is not very flammable. If you take a lighter to it and try and burn it, it doesn't catch on fire very easily. It kind of just melts. I've now had 3M Thinsulate in 2 of my Sprinter vans. This one here we've had and camped in for about 5 years now. Honestly, I think most people who have a lot of experience building vans are gonna point you in the same direction of using 3M Thinsulate. So Maddie and I are in the van, and I'm basically trying to figure out where should we actually start with this insulation. These E350s, now that I have one, it looks like it's going to be way harder than insulating a Sprinter van because you have this second skin right here. So the process for all of these cavities is you basically just measure the length, you measure the height, and I honestly just cut mostly squares and rectangles unless it's like a very, very strange shape, then I'll kind of try and adjust for it. You actually kind of want to make it slightly larger so that the insulation squeezes on both sides and you get a nice seal that doesn't allow any additional airflow. So for this cavity right here, I'm basically going to over measure it a little bit so I can see it kind of goes into the wall over here. I'm going to call it 30 inches wide, 12 inches tall. I'm going to use a series of different straight edges. This is a drywall square and then a medium length and a long length straight edge. I'm going to use a Sharpie to mark it. We are going to be marking it on the white side, and then I have a big ass pair of fabric shears. I'll put links to all the tools as well in the description below. And then I prefer to just buy a couple of sheets of rigid insulation to lay our insulation on top of, just because I don't want it collecting dirt and stuff off of the ground while we're cutting it. Then we are just going to go to 30. So I'm going to mark that right there. And we are simply drawing ourselves a line. Take our shears. Ooh, these work really well. Already very pleased. Okay, first piece is cut. Okay, so first attempt failed trying to get it down through here because it's not going behind this panel here, which only has like a 1/2 of an inch of space. Now we basically need to try and use any existing holes here. Maddie found one there, and try and stuff this piece in. So it turns out Maddie is very good at this. She has snuck the insulation through here and actually woven it all the way back to the back of that panel. So honestly, this is what it kind of comes down to installing this insulation, is you just got to get creative ways to shove it into all the crevices. So in my first van, I didn't shove it into all the crevices. I was a little bit lazy with it. I didn't think it was going to add much benefit. In my second van, I put it into all the hard to reach spaces, and it actually added quite a bit of noticeable insulation value once it got to the point where we were actually camping in it. And I also forgot to mention a huge benefit to 3M Thinsulate. Its original purpose was actually sound deadening material. So not only does it create really nice thermal insulation for the van, but once you're done, it makes the inside of the van way quieter when you're camped and also when you're driving.
Okay, so this is what we figured out how to do. I tie a knot, and then and then it perfectly fills out that whole spot. And then I just untie the knot and it's in.
Perfect. So Maddie came up with a strategy that she said is working super well. We basically had to get an insulation piece through this whole channel right here, which there's no way to stuff it in there. So she took the wire snake, which, do you want to extend it real quick? That thing extends out, it's a flat piece of steel. She routed that all the way through, popped it out at the start of the insulation, tied a string to the installation, and pulled the insulation all the way back through. I think one of these is going to be very helpful for pulling insulation through tight corners. I'll put a link to this wire snake in the description below. At first, Maddie was having trouble with the string method because the string was basically just pulling straight through the insulation. But she just told me the way she solved it is she just doubled it up and she put it farther back in the insulation so there's more surface area for it to pull. And apparently that's the right way to go.
I couldn't find the end of the tape, and I have my whole hand, my right hand, shoved in here, and look, it's coming out. I can't.
Making fun of me because I do all the easy ones.
While I have been doing holes that look like that, Alec gets these ones.
This is your initiation to the van build world.
He told me he's just a really good manager. He's good at delegating. I wore the wrong pants today. This is all insulation.
Also, I don't know if we covered this particular tip yet, but alongside the wire tape, we have used these little, they're actually plastic trim removal tools. I've already used this a bunch of times during this project. I definitely recommend getting yourself a set of these things. They're pretty cheap. I'll put a link to the set that I have in the video description below. This one in particular is really good for stuffing insulation into places that it's hard to reach. By the way, some of these cavities are thick enough in these E350s where you need up to 3 layers of insulation, particularly around the wheel wells here. So it's not always just about getting one layer in there. It's as many as you can reasonably fit without squishing them too much. Okay, so yesterday we spent about 8 hours doing insulation and we actually finished a ton of this. Surprisingly, it actually looks like we've done nothing still though. We spent our entire time, especially Maddie, doing all the hardest parts, getting insulation stuffed into all of the panels that you can't see. So if you look really closely, you can see that there's insulation behind the first layer of sheet metal all the way around the van, including 2 pieces of insulation, one over the back and then one inside this channel around the whole top of the van. I'm very happy we finished that because that was honestly the hardest parts. Okay, I'm also using a little bit of the sound deadening material, the stuff called Kill Mat. You've seen it in my previous videos. So the thing I've learned about this sound deadening mat is it's actually not really that useful in general for van builders. The type of noise that we're trying to reduce doesn't typically get reduced by these. Let me explain that real quick. All this stuff does, it's not magic material. It's just heavy, sticky stuff. So what it does is it increases the mass of the panels and prevents them from rattling quite as much. So a lot of the times you'll see audio guys put a thick layer of the sound deadening stuff around where the speakers are because those panels want to vibrate, and if you add mass to them, they're less likely to vibrate. The only real place where it makes sense to put a little bit of Kill Mat is any very large flat sheet that's not reinforced. So I'm gonna put a couple here, and I am gonna put a few strips along the ceiling, but that's it. You don't want to go overboard with this stuff. It really is not that effective. It's super easy to install this stuff. You just get one of these rollers, you cut out a sheet to the right size. In my case, I didn't even cut it. I just used the sheet size that they came with. And then you just peel the back off and roll it onto the panel. I'll put links to the tool in the description below. So today what we have to do is I'm basically going to cut out bigger sheets of insulation and glue them to the faces of the walls that are more exposed where you can actually see them, including the ceiling. Let's get cracking. So we're gonna install our first big sheet of insulation here. We have to use our 3M90. I'll put link to this particular adhesive in the description below. We're just gonna shake it up real well. We're gonna spray some on this side, and then we're gonna spray a little bit on this side, and we're just gonna try and align it as best as possible. You really don't need too much of this stuff. It works really well. So go ahead and give it the old college try. You want to let it dry for a second, but honestly, I've learned you don't really need to let this stuff dry for too long. Just like that, we have our first sheet up. So now we're basically just going to repeat this for all of the additional exposed areas that are extra deep on the wall panels. Okay, so you can see we have most of the big panels on the walls and on the ceilings fully insulated. Yes, I did skip this one. This is going to be a surprise video that I'm pretty excited about. Also, we did not fully go around the windows yet. I have to do some more work on the windows this week, but once I do that, I'm basically just gonna cut small strips that match the outline of the windows so that they're nice and tightly insulated. I am going to see if we can get a piece of insulation up there above the headliner. Took us the whole weekend to do this, about 8 to 10 hours yesterday and probably 4 to 5 today. It took so much work to get all the insulation into the crevices between the two sheets of metal. So you might be wondering, why didn't I cover a lot of this exposed metal with insulation? Well, that's mostly because the walls on these E350s are very strangely shaped. I think it's gonna work a lot better if I just wait until I put my wall panels up and I put a piece of Thinsulate on the back of the wall panels and screw that to the wall so that the whole wall panel has a thermal break, and we can guarantee all of the coverage here. I forget exactly how much I bought, but I will put that on the screen right here with the pretty much, I'd say, perfect amount of insulation for insulating an E350. And I can already tell sitting in here that this van is just much more sound deadened and insulated. Super, super excited to just have this project done. This is definitely one of those delayed gratification projects where you finish it and you're like, oh man, did I even do anything? But once your build is done, you're gonna be very, very grateful that you actually insulated. I am gonna give you guys a little outro with some B-roll to just show you some close-ups of the completed project. If you guys did like this video, I'm gonna be completing this build out on the channel. Please press the subscribe button. That shows me that I'm doing content that you guys wanna see.